My brother raised his glass at Mum's birthday. Your empty house is sold, Hay announced. Someone had to pay your debts. Everyone nodded. He just smiled. 10 minutes later, the U.S. Marshals walked in. I didn't vanish. I was removed from the map neatly, like a pin pulled from a chart. 3 years ago, I followed a trail that wasn't supposed to be seen. At work, I read ledgers, the way some people read palms. The numbers kept whispering the same thing: assets out shadows, in a rhythm that only money launderers dance to. I turned the pattern over to the people whose badges outweigh denial. They thanked me with a new phone, a new address, and a very clear instruction silence. Not forever, long enough. I signed forms that made my name smaller. I moved into a studio that sounded like a refrigerator and a clock. I learned the weight of a burner phone, how it feels in your pocket, like a secret you carry for the government. I slept under a smoke detector blink and called it a star. When people asked why I stopped coming home, I said I was busy. That word is a paper wall. It hides nothing, but it satisfies most people who want to be done asking. My family did not want to be done. They needed a story, so they wrote one. In it, I was the ambitious daughter who traded Sunday dinners for promotions. The ghost who only texted on holidays, the ungrateful one who forgot who paid for braces and ballet. It was convenient theater. They played their roles. I was expected to bow. Here is the part nobody likes to say out loud. In families like mine, the quiet kid is not peaceful. She is compliant. You learn the temperature of the house by the volume of one voice, and you keep it low. You learn that telling the truth makes storms, and storms flip furniture. So you take your truths and fold them small. You tuck them into your cheeks and learn to smile without swallowing. That is what I did for years. I thought it meant I was kind. It only meant I was good at losing. Silence became my product. I supplied it, they consumed it. Every time I swallowed a comment, every time I paid a bill and said nothing, I was underwriting the myth that everything was fine. I called it love. It was credit. They kept spending. Witness protection did not invent my quiet. It professionalized it. The rules were clear. No unexpected travel. No unmonitored calls. No explanations. I could have told them I was helping bury a hydra made of shell companies and offshore accounts, that my spreadsheets were a net pulling something ugly to the surface. I could have said that silence kept me alive and kept them out of somebody else's crosshairs. But details are flint. Strike them, and someone sees a spark. I let them sit in the dark and decided that safety was better than being understood. The apartment was small, but the boundaries were clean. One toothbrush, one mug, one plant that did not ask about my day. I ate dinner at a desk and listened to the building's plumbing talk to itself. I ran at dawn when the city was a blank receipt. I kept a list of what I could control: passwords, backups, 2 copies of every document, and a life that fit in 2 bags. I kept another list of what I could: not my brother's resentment, my mother's disappointment, and the itch people feel when the person they depended on stops paying the emotional invoice. They told each other I thought I was better than them. No, I thought rules mattered. I followed them until they turned into walls. Their calls came less often and got meaner. You could hear the choir forming. She left us. She forgot us. She chose herself. They were building a verdict and inviting me to supply the confession. I didn't answer. That wasn't pettiness. That was policy. There is a phrase therapists like: learned helplessness. It sounds academic until you live it. In my house, conflict had interest rates. If you spoke up, you paid more later, so you learned to avoid the loan. You smiled. You changed the subject. You called your brother reliable because he was loud, and loud looked like certainty. You let your mother believe sacrifice and silence are twins. You told yourself that being good meant being quiet, that love is endurance with a ribbon on it. The bill always arrives, eventually. I remember the first week after the move. My phone didn't ring at dinner time. No group threads buzzing about errands. No sudden requests for a transfer to float us till Friday. I stood in the kitchen with my hands on the counter and waited for guilt to bloom. Nothing came. Only a clean stillness, thin at first, then solid enough to lean on. I mistook it for loneliness. It was the foundation. When the anger did show up, it wasn't loud. It was clinical. I set up automatic payments for my own life, not theirs. I kept receipts the way you keep promises to yourself. I built routines that ran without anyone else's emergencies. I watched the version of me they'd invented drift like a balloon down a hallway I no longer lived in. She looked familiar. She was useful to them. She wasn't me. I did not choose distance because I stopped caring. I chose it because caring had become a contract I never signed. There is a difference between loyalty and liability. One honors you. The other uses you. When the government told me to stay quiet, they were protecting a case. When I kept staying quiet, I was protecting a life I had not admitted I wanted. The two silencers overlapped until one day I could not tell which one I was obeying. That's when I understood something simple. My compassion had been a luxury they overdrafted for years. Closing that account was not cruelty. It was accounting. The invitation came wrapped in guilt, just like always. Mom's 60th. Everyone's going to be there, she said, like that was supposed to mean something sacred. After 3 years of silence, I decided to go. Not for them, just to see what kind of ghost they'd built in my place. The restaurant was expensive in that way, meant to impress strangers. Polished glass waterfront view plates that made you feel small. I arrived early, sat at the end of the table. No one looked surprised. Just curious, like they were studying a rumor that had come to life. Mom gave me that half-hug people save for distant relatives, Dad said. You look tired, which was his way of saying I looked wrong. And Ryan, my brother, the golden son, grinned and said, well, if it isn't the family mystery. I smiled. It wasn't warmth, it was muscle memory. They talked. I listened. Ryan's stories filled the space like perfume. His new office, his top clients, his latest luxury sale. Melissa, his wife, scrolled through her phone between sips of wine, the kind of woman who live streams empathy but never practices it. Mom laughed at everything Ryan said. Dad nodded like he was watching a stock rise. When the waiter brought dessert, Ryan raised his glass. To success, he said. They clinked. I sipped water. Then he turned to me with a grin that had too many teeth. Speaking of success, he said, I finally handled that mess of yours. What mess? I asked. He waved his hand like it was obvious. Your townhouse, the one sitting empty for 3 years. I found a buyer, closed last week. You're welcome. The room went silent. Forks paused midair. For a second, I thought he was joking. Then I saw the pride on his face, the kind that only comes from doing something unforgivable and believing it's noble. You sold my house. Technically, I finalized the deal, he said. It was wasting money, taxes, maintenance, all that. You should be thanking me. I felt everything slow down. My pulse didn't spike. It flattened. That house wasn't just mine. It was federal property under protection. He hadn't just trespassed. He'd stepped into a classified cage. How did you even sell it? Ryan laughed. Power of attorney. Remember that document you signed years ago? I had it updated. Digital authorization? Easy. My stomach turned cold. I had never signed anything. I wanted to ask if he knew what he'd just done. I wanted to ask why. But I already knew. Jealousy wears 1,000 disguises. His favorite one was responsibility. All our lives, Ryan needed to be the hero. When I worked quietly, he worked loudly. When I followed rules, he broke them and called it charm. He used to say, "You think too much, Em. That's why you never win." Maybe he believed that. Maybe he thought selling my house would make him the savior again. Mom reached for my hand. "Sweetheart, he only did what was best." Best for whom? For the family's image. For the brother who couldn't stand that his little sister owned something he didn't. I looked at Ryan and I saw it the satisfaction of erasing what I'd built. He wasn't trying to help. He was trying to rewrite the scoreboard. "The house was under government protection," I said quietly. Ryan frowned. "Come on, Emily. Don't start with your spy nonsense again." "It wasn't nonsense." "You disappeared," he said, his voice sharp. "You left us to deal with everything. I cleaned up your mess." My mess. That's what he called it. The years I'd spent in silence to keep my family safe had become a punchline at his dinner table. Anger didn't feel like fire anymore. It felt like ice clean and still. I smiled. "You forged federal documents, Ryan. Congratulations. You just committed a crime." He laughed too loud. "Oh, please." "Don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork." Mom's hand tightened on my wrist. "Emily, don't ruin tonight." "Ruin it," I said. "It's already ruined." I stood up. The waiter froze mid-step. The candles flickered from the shift of air. Ryan's smirk faltered for a moment, like he'd heard something he couldn't process. "You're overreacting," he said. "No," I said. "I'm calculating." I left before dessert hit the table. Behind me their voices rose in confusion, defense, disbelief. Outside the night air was sharp and clean, the kind that cuts through noise. I took out my phone. One call. One name. Deputy Marshal Daniel Reyes. When he answered, his tone was neutral. "Carter, they sold the townhouse," I said. Silence. Then a clipped response. "Stay where you are. We're on it." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my coat. My reflection in the restaurant's glass doors looked calm, even serene. Inside, my family was still laughing, still sure they owned the narrative. They didn't know that laughter has a shelf life. What Ryan had done wasn't just betrayal. It was evidence. He'd always needed to prove he was in control. Tonight, he finally would, just not in the way he expected. I didn't run. I didn't even look back at the table. The air outside the restaurant felt cleaner, like stepping out of a lie. I walked to the edge of the pier, leaned against the railing, and watched the lights ripple on the water. Cold, glassy, precise. That's how my thoughts felt. I called Reyes again. "They're still inside," I said. He replied, "Stay put. We're 8 minutes out. 8 minutes. Enough time to end a lifetime of unpaid debts." Inside, my family would be ordering coffee, pretending everything was fine. They'd be congratulating Ryan for being responsible for saving his poor sister from her own negligence. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. They had no idea that the buyer wasn't real, that the signatures were being tracked, that every keystroke in that fake sale was already federal evidence. Reyes once told me that justice doesn't need noise, it needs precision. Tonight I understood. The cars arrived quiet and dark. 2 unmarked sedans. Doors opened, agents stepped out. Reyes walked toward me, coat collar up, expression unreadable. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready for 3 years," I said. We entered together. The restaurant's hum dimmed when the agents spread out, polite, calm, lethal. My family turned startled. Mom smiled like she was about to offer them seats. Is something wrong, officers? She asked. Reyes showed his badge. Deputy U.S. Marshal Reyes. We need to speak with Ryan Carter. Ryan blinked, confused. That's me. What's this about? Reyes' voice stayed even. A property transaction. The townhouse on Charles Street. Ryan laughed nervously. You're kidding, right? That's a family thing, not a federal one. Reyes held his gaze. That property was under Department of Justice protection. The sale was recorded last week using forged authorization. We have reason to believe you executed it. The table went still. The only sound was the fizz of champagne going flat. Mom looked from Reyes to me. Emily, what's happening? I didn't answer. Ryan's face reddened. This is ridiculous. She's making this up. You, he pointed at me, you're behind this, aren't you? You've always wanted to see me fail, Reyes interrupted. Mr. Carter, you'll need to come with us. He reached for Ryan's phone, scanning the confirmation emails that linked to the shell buyer. Interesting choice of broker name. Bristol Holdings. You know that's a federal front, right? Ryan's mouth opened and closed. What? Reyes' continued tone almost conversational. We use it to flag unauthorized attempts to access protected assets. Congratulations, you just signed into a sting operation. Mom gasped. Melissa whispered Ryan's name like it might undo the scene. Dad said, there must be a mistake. Reyes looked at him. There isn't. Then the cuffs clicked. Not loud, just final. Ryan tried to stand taller. You can't do this. I'm her brother. Reyes glanced at me, then back at him. That's exactly why we can. The moment stretched. The waiter, unsure, brought out a cake lit with candles. The tiny flames flickered against the mirrored walls. No one moved. Ryan's wrists gleamed with metal. Mom started to cry quietly at first. Dad stared down at the table the way men do when the math no longer adds up. I watched it all from a distance of about 6 feet, close enough to see the collapse far enough to stay clean. There was no pleasure in it, just symmetry. When Ryan passed me, he whispered, You did this. I met his eyes. No, I said. You did. The marshals led him out. The door swung shut soft as a sigh. Silence settled over the table, heavy and sterile. Melissa dabbed at her makeup. Mom finally looked at me, confusion and horror mingled. Why didn't you stop this? She whispered. Because it was already in motion, I said. I placed my napkin on the table, straightened my jacket, and turned to leave. As I walked past the glass, I caught my reflection again. Calm, measured. It struck me how justice doesn't roar, it recalibrates. Outside, the river shimmered like a ledger being wiped clean. Reyes joined me on the sidewalk. It's over, he said. I nodded. No, I said quietly. It's balanced. They called it a family emergency. I called it what it was, damage control. 2 weeks after the arrest, I opened my door to find my parents standing in the hallway, clutching each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Mom's mascara had traveled south. Dad's tie looked strangled. Emily, she whispered, please, we need to talk. I stepped aside. You have 5 minutes. They entered like people crossing enemy lines. My apartment was too small for their kind of denial. No portraits, no clutter, just white walls and the smell of coffee. Mom sat without asking. They're saying Ryan could face years. Prison, Emily. He's your brother. I nodded. That's usually what happens when you forge federal documents. Dad's voice cracked. You could fix this. You have connections. Just tell them you don't want to press charges. I looked at him. You think this is about me wanting or not wanting something. This isn't personal. It's legal." He slammed his palm on the table. "He made a mistake. I didn't flinch. He made a choice. Repeatedly. To lie, to steal, to think the rules didn't apply to him. You call it a mistake because it's easier to pity him than to admit you raised him to believe he was untouchable." Mom sobbed. "He did it for you," I laughed once, sharp cold. "He did it to me." She reached out. "Honey, we can't lose both of you. Please just say you'll drop it." I picked up a folder from the counter and handed it across the table. "Here's what you're asking me to ignore. Ryan's indictment, file pages of transactions, forgeries, timestamps, evidence as clean and final as winter air. They flipped through the papers, eyes scanning words they didn't want to understand, fraud, obstruction, money laundering attempt." Mom whispered, "How could he?" and stopped. "Because you let him," I thought. I stood. "I can't undo this." "And I wouldn't if I could." Dad's voice was hoarse. "You're destroying what's left of this family." I looked him in the eye. "No, I'm refusing to be destroyed with it." Mom broke then knees, weak breath ragged. The sound of someone realizing the world has consequences. She fell forward, hands clutching my sleeve. "Emily, please. He's your brother." I pulled free gently. "He's a grown man who sold my name for profit. I warned him what silence costs. Now he knows the price." When they left, the hallway stayed filled with the scent of her perfume and the echo of Dad's muttering, heartless, cold, ungrateful. Maybe, but at least it was accurate. I closed the door and leaned against it, the quiet pressing in. Not empty, just clean. That's when I started writing. Not to them, but to the people like me. To the ones accused of being cruel because they stopped carrying everyone else's weight. I wrote, "If you've ever been called heartless for protecting your peace, listen. They will tell you you're selfish when you stop bleeding for them. They will say you've changed when you finally enforce boundaries. But you haven't changed. You've returned to yourself. They confuse your silence with apathy because they only valued your voice when it agreed with their version of events. Let them talk. Let them miss the old you who kept saving them from the messes they made. You don't owe anyone your ruin." I paused, reread the words, and smiled. Not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from certainty. Justice isn't vengeance, it's equilibrium. And I was finally standing in balance. The headlines came first. "Boston broker pleads guilty in federal witness protection breach." Then the calls I didn't answer. Then the silence heavy stretched complete. Ryan took the plea deal. 3 years in federal prison, 5 on supervised release. The restitution covered the forged sale, the damages, the fees. He'd serve his time. He'd walk out one day with a clean record and a lifetime's worth of debt to his own conscience. My parents went public. Mom told the news that I'd destroyed our family over a misunderstanding. Dad called me cold. Melissa, ever the PR expert, wrote a post about forgiveness that got 10,000 likes. And I stayed silent. At the Department of Justice, my clearance expanded. I joined the Cybercrimes Division, chasing the same kind of schemes I'd once uncovered. My supervisor called me meticulous. What he didn't know was that meticulous wasn't a skill. It was survival. I moved to D.C. and bought an apartment overlooking the Potomac. Every morning I watched the water shift from gray to gold, the way the city wakes up like an equation balancing itself. People think silence is empty. It's not. It's structure. One night I opened my old family spreadsheet, the one I'd used to track payments, favors, emotional debts disguised as generosity. Every cell was a reminder tuition. I'd paid bills, I'd covered bailouts that came with a thank you text and a new demand. For years I'd treated love like bookkeeping, terrified that cutting anyone off would make me the villain. Now I understood that heroes don't exist in families like ours, just financiers. I scrolled to the bottom, selected all, and hit delete. No drama, no ceremony, just numbers vanishing, replaced by a clean page. I leaned back and whispered, "Some silences aren't empty, they're peace." A week later, a letter came from the Bureau's internal courier. No return address, just a folded sheet inside, Ryan's handwriting. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't even justify it. He just wrote, "You were right. I thought power meant control. I see now it means responsibility. I'm trying to learn that. I hope you're free." I read it twice, then tucked it in a drawer, not framed, not burned, just kept like evidence that change was possible, but not my responsibility to witness. Sometimes I still think about that night at the restaurant, the candles flickering, the laughter that turned into shock. People talk about revenge like it's a flame, but it isn't. It's arithmetic. What you take, what you give back, what remains. 3 years later, Ryan got out. Aunt Marie posted a photo. "Welcome home, Rye." I didn't react, didn't reach out. Some debts are paid in distance. That same year, I led a case that recovered $200 million in stolen assets. They called me the quiet one who never misses. They didn't know how right they were. On the anniversary of the arrest, I stood on my balcony, the river below glowing with city light, and thought of everything I'd lost and how none of it was mine to keep. The family approval, forgiveness. They were currencies I no longer traded in. If you've ever been called cruel for choosing peace, this story is yours. If you've ever walked away from people who loved your compliance more than your honesty, you understand. Silence isn't weakness. It's the sound integrity makes when it finally stops apologizing. If you've ever had to choose between loyalty and self-respect, share this. Someone out there needs to know that choosing yourself isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And clarity is the kindest ending there is.